Welcome, and we are an hour away from happy hour, so that's a good thing. This is the last session of the day. It's gone fast. This is my second year here at the conference, and it just amazes me in terms of just all the knowledge that you can soak up in terms of each of these sessions. Now, quick disclaimer, I am not Patrick Bauer. And this is not the planning for the best, preparing for the worst, etc. session. In the spirit of being agile, Patrick's plane was delayed. So Patrick and I are switching sessions. I'm the 8:30 a.m. session tomorrow morning, and so Patrick and I are going to switch places, okay? So we are instead, we're going to focus on building blocks for an effective and efficient executive S&OP process. I'm going to touch on a little bit about Owens Corning, the company that I work for, give you a couple quick tidbits about myself, talk about the Owens Corning S&OP cycle, give you an overview of that, and then I'm going to go into what we consider the S&OP building blocks at Owens Corning that are the foundational elements to success for us, and then summarize with key takeaways. So first, without any further ado, Owens Corning at a glance has been around for about 80 years. We were founded in 1938. We have three strong businesses, which I'm going to touch on more in a moment here. We have about 16,000 employees worldwide, and we operate in 26 countries around the world. We've been on the Fortune 500 for 62 consecutive years, and this last fiscal year of 2016 had just under $6 billion of sales. If you look at our three business units, they're very different, but similar. The one that I think most people are probably most familiar with is the one in the center, which is our insulation business. This is the insulation that you'd see at a Home Depot or a Lowe's that you'd put inside of your walls when you're doing home construction or new home residential construction. And for those of you as old as I am, you probably remember the Pink Panther commercials in terms of rolling out the insulation, the attic, etc. So that's a proud mascot of ours. Another business we have, though, on the left here is the roofing business. And this is our roofing asphalt shingles business. And what we do is we have, the asphalt shingles, a variety of components, underlayments, accessories, etc., that we sell along that create full roofing systems. And then the final business, and all of these businesses are roughly about the same size, is our composites business. Now this is the business that I work in, and this is a business that's been more challenging for us to explain to our investors. And in fact, it's probably one of the most challenging businesses in Owens Corning. It doesn't make as much intuitive sense in terms of the products that we sell, and I'll kind of cover those in a second, as you can think about a bat of insulation that you put into a wall or a roofing shingle that you put on your roof. Instead, in the composites business unit, what we do is we manufacture essentially glass fibers that are specialized in terms of the different resins and the diameters and the properties that we add to them, and they go into other manufacturers' processes. And you're going to be much more familiar with those products than ours. So with that being said, as we look at kind of what some of our markets are in the composites business unit, we have a large portion of our business that goes into the building construction area. And for example, we're vertically integrated, so all of our roofing shingles, the composite fiber mat comes from our composites business. And then what we do is we take that mat, we spray it with asphalt, we coat it with granules, and that's what ultimately goes on your roof. But we also have a big presence in transportation. In the consumer, you can think of like boat hulls in terms of the fiberglass. Our product goes and is the key ingredient in that. Industrial piping. And then, a lot of people think of power and energy. So if you think about those mega windmills, those turbines, those blades are constructed from our fibers. So really, what is a composite? And so what I've done here is I've got a few of our products shown up here that we sell. We've got Type 30 is a specific branded product. We've got rovings, we've got mats, we've got wucks, and we've got ducts. all of those mean absolutely nothing to you and meant nothing to me when I joined composites either. But the key thing is all of these are different materials in terms of different outputs that we produce that are key products that go into some of those markets we talked about. And so really what a composite is just a combination of two things. And in our case, it's a glass and a resin. And a technology that we use to make it specific to the needs of the end market we're selling into. And why would you want to use glass? Well, there's a variety of reasons. It adds dimensional strength, it reduces weight, it resists corrosion, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of benefits. And if you think about the macro trends that are going on and trying to get more mileage in terms of your vehicles, et cetera, there's a lot of markets that we're going into with our products to be able to go and satisfy those needs. So if we think about the diverse range of applications, I've already talked a little bit about the properties that are important here. It's the lightweight, durable, corrosion resistant. Those provide attributes that are important to our customers. Energy efficiency, durability, so on and so forth. And again, it goes into your wind markets, your transportation, fiberglass ladders, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the range of applications that we have. And then if you look at our business, we've got a global footprint. And so again, we've got, in our composites business, it's probably the most global out of all of our businesses. The other ones are a lot more focused in North America. We have the #1 position in the world. And indeed, most areas we are the #1 position with probably the exception of China where we have an emerging position there. And if you think about this global footprint, now as I start to get you away from kind of about our business, you start to think about how we're organized from a supply chain to be able to support this. And the way that we're organized is in each of our major regions. So we've got the Americas, we've got Europe, and we've got Asia Pacific. We've got a regional supply chain that reports up into the general manager for that particular region. And then we've got a global center of excellence that goes across the top. And really, that's the group that I report into. And our goal is to make sure that any decisions that we make are to the benefit of the overall global enterprise, rather than just the P&L of any one particular region. So that's kind of a little bit of a flavor for kind of where we're going. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm currently the global S&OP leader at Owens Corning. I've been doing this role for, it's going on 2 years now. I was in the same seat as you guys last year at this time. Really like this conference. Recommend it to anybody. You're going to get what you put into it. I recommend that you try to go to as many of these sessions as possible. Try to network as much as you can with your peers. There's a variety of different maturity levels in terms of supply chain that you're going to see at this conference. I think you can learn from anybody, whether you're a stage 1 or stage 4. I've had 18 years of what I'd say is cross-functional experience. Emphasis in supply chain, but also systems and process improvement. I'm a proud Wolverine. Both my bachelor's and my master's there. Go blue for any fellow Wolverines. There we go. And I'm not here, the key thing I want to point out is I'm not here as an expert, but rather as a fellow practitioner. And really, I'm excited to share the journey that we've had at Owens Corning and Composites in terms of developing our executive review into something that's really well received by our leadership. So I'll kind of back up and give you a quick history lesson on this. When I first joined, we have, and I'll get to this in a second here, we have an executive that's passionate about S&OP. That's a huge, huge deal right there. That's probably the biggest thing that you need. But there was dissatisfaction in the way that the S&OP was operating. And as I had a chance to sit down with him and with my now leader, et cetera, and talk through some of the things that the satisfaction was generated from, it seemed like simple things. People would, like the pre-read, would come out 24 hours in advance, and then a revision 12 hours in advance, and then another revision 3 hours in advance, and another revision 1 hour before the meeting. And then you'd get into the meeting, and people would be like, I don't know what you're talking about with this number. I've got this number. This doesn't match mine. And so you'd have all these things where we were tripping over ourselves, over what seemed like the simplest things, the blocking and tackling, et cetera. And so that's one of the things that we set out, and you'll see that in the theme of how I set this up, of we were going to attack and fix that early on because there was no way we were going to be successful in what we wanted to do without getting those barriers taken care of first. And so what's in this for me? Again, as I said, last year I was in your seat. I had a chance to make a lot of contacts, talk to a lot of people, and through the benchmarking that we were able to do, it was great because we were able to share some things that we were doing well, but then we were also to learn from some of the people that we benchmarked with in areas that they had innovative ideas that we were able to steal shamelessly and roll that into our process. And so I think benchmarking is one of the most important things that you can get out of this conference in terms of kind of making those connections, talking to each other, and learning from what works well and what doesn't. So as I talk to the Owens Corning S&OP cycle, it really starts at the beginning with your strategic priorities. So it's important to understand where you want to go in terms of the blueprint for the year, the next several years in terms of your product life cycle, what products you're introducing, et cetera. It's very important to understand what your strategic growth initiatives are, whether it's revenue, EBIT, what are the imperatives at the top in terms of are we trying to drive down working capital, et cetera. So all of those strategic priorities are what you start off with. And then the first phase that we have is our product portfolio management. Now, what I want to be clear on here is we by no means are experts in each of these different buckets. We're at different stages of maturity in each one, and this is probably one of the ones where we have the most opportunity for growth. Because I think we're pretty good at introducing new products when it looks at new product introduction and the process around that, et cetera. What we're not very good at is when we go through the renovation stage of the exit of the product life cycle, and we see that a product is dying, is not profitable, et cetera, and we just can't get the sales guy or the marketing guy to kind of kill it because it's strategic to a certain customer or it's going to come back, et cetera. So there's definitely opportunity for us to improve there. That product lifecycle management flows into the demand management process, which I think several of you guys do, which then flows into our inventory planning. And what we do here is we've got, not too dissimilar to what I'm sure a lot of you do, is we've got a structured process where we're understanding where we have make to order, make to stock, what different layers of inventory we need to have, and making sure that we're all aligned on what the appropriate level is. That flows into the supply planning process that we have, which we do our rough cut capacity planning process, aligned around the globe. And then finally, this culminates in the executive S&OP review, which is where I'm going to really kind of dive in and spend the rest of the time in this session. And what you'll notice in the center here is you'll notice we've got our operating rhythms. We've got 4 key operating rhythms around cost, cash, and service with forecast value added in the center. So these are all things that we're trying to drive that are key KPIs inside of our process and that have the way that we do it is it may not have a focused attention in every S&OP, but it has its own carved out operating rhythm and meeting and structure every single month on its own with the right audience. And we report in a scorecard at the S&OP in terms of how we're doing and where we need assistance. So now what I want to do is I want to turn our attention to the building blocks. But before I do that, I want to kind of talk about a concept. When I was putting these slides together, the way that I kind of visualize this is I'm an economics major, but I had to take psychology. And I don't remember much from psychology, but I do remember this one concept around the basic human needs. There's a pyramid, I think it's Maslow's pyramid, a hierarchy of needs. On the bottom of that hierarchy is your need for safety and shelter and food and so on and so forth. And as you go up that hierarchy, you get to a tip where you're working on self-actualization, where you're really looking at trying to just make yourself the best person that you can be. And so as you think through these building blocks, that was what I had in mind, which is there are some things that we're going to start off with that are foundational. And like food and safety and shelter, if you don't have these, you really don't want to go on to the next level. You've got to get these foundational elements right, okay? So the first foundational element, and I struggled on the first two, on which one to put as the first, but the one that I put as number one is executive engagement. And to me, this is a challenge, because this is a chicken or an egg type of thing. I don't believe that you can have an effective S&OP process without executive engagement. I don't believe you can have executive engagement without an effective S&OP process. So the question is, how do you kind of reconcile that? And again, I shared at the beginning, my full disclosure is I was really blessed coming into this role. I have a senior executive that is very passionate about S&OP and wants it to be, what we leverage to run the business. And we do, which is, I recognize, is a huge head start on probably a lot of people in terms of that, removing that barrier. So what can you do if you're not so lucky? Well, to me, it comes back to, again, what's in it for me. And as I'm thinking like an executive, we need to help them to understand the value of them being involved. Now, there's a number of published articles that you can go reference that'll talk to, what companies with effective S&OP can gain in terms of, better margins, better working capital, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about that to you as much, but I think I'd encourage you to do that research. But the key thing for me is even stepping back a level, being more proactive. The story that I would share is being more proactive allows us to avoid those fires, allows us to have better service, which supports revenue, which creates this virtuous cycle. And instead of being in this vicious cycle where we have to go and continue to expedite and we're failing on service and what have you, it allows us to really get out in front, be more advanced in our planning, and ultimately lower our costs, improve our service, and improve our margins and our business results. An example that I'll give you that you can say that if you want, some guy at an S&OP conference shared this example, is we had last year, we had a scenario that we were running in our S&OP, and I'll get to more of scenarios later on in the presentation. And the scenario was around really an upside and a downside situation in one of our product family markets. And looking at our forecast and everything that we had looking out, we thought we were in pretty good shape. We're like, we can handle a lot of the variability that we expect. But as we did our extreme upside analysis, what we found is we had risk. We had risk that we could not cover the extreme upside. Now, mind you, this product wasn't very profitable in and of itself, but it was a very key input to our sister business in terms of one of their products, and the full chain was hugely profitable. So if we run out of this product, at least this is the advice that was given to me when I got in this role, is don't run out of this product because you'll be in the CEO's office. So we talked through it and we said, look, here's the scenarios that we see, the different probabilities. We can make this investment, which is in CapEx, in terms of this capability that would allow us to produce more. And if we do it, we're gonna win if we get the upside. If we don't do it, we're gonna really be in hot water. However, if the upside doesn't materialize, we've got some fancy furniture that's kind of sitting off to the side, not used. Ultimately, we made the decision. It was a collaborative, cross-functional decision to take the risk with the CapEx, knowing the risks on the upside that we wanted to be able to mitigate. The story is great because the upside came, and we were able to service it, and it was a great situation. Now, what I would tell you is it could have played out differently. It could have been the upside maybe doesn't come, and you're stuck with this investment that you made. The key on that, the value, is that we did that together as a team. We looked at it, we recognized the pros and the cons, and made that decision, and it was a big win. And that is one of the rhythms that we've kind of gotten into as we've gone through this process. The other one, this is the one that I struggle with as well in terms of whether this was number one, is what I call blocking and tackling. There's absolutely nothing fancy about what I'm going to share with you on this. But I'll also tell you, if you don't do this, you're dead in the water. And think about it this way, a football analogy, you're going to go put in the fanciest spread offense, you're going to put in a really complex defense, your guys are going to be just thinking, and you're going to have great strategy, but you haven't taught them how to block and tackle. You're not going to do very well. You've got to get those basics down first and foremost. So this is one of the things that we really focused on early on, because the feedback to me was this is one of the areas where we were failing. So tips from my experience. Before the meeting, one, get your meeting scheduled for the full year in advance. And what I'll tell you is executives are busy. Get it out there. Make friends with their admins. They're going to save your life, and they're going to help you to kind of get everything coordinated. Make sure you've got all the right players included. It needs to be, really a cross-functional experience with, sales, finance, your market intelligence, so on and so forth. Everybody needs to be involved in this. And this is probably one of the biggest ones that should go without saying, but it's something that gets missed, is you've got to spend the necessary time to vet the numbers, make sure everything's accurate, that everything ties out in terms of across what the finance team is going to expect to be the number and what you're saying is the number, what the regional team says is their number, so on and so forth. A really good tool that I use, I'm a Six Sigma black belt in a prior life. A really good tool that I use, and I'm not going to spend too much time going into it here, but it's called a failure modes effects analysis. And one of the first things that I did, based on the feedback that I received, was I did a full failure modes effects analysis on all of the ways that our S&OP process could fail. And so there were things like misalignment with the regional team in terms of the number, or the finance team. There was a data integrity in terms of from our ERP system transfer to our S&OP system. So we covered all the different gamuts. We went through and we scored each of them in terms of their risk, and you can look it up online. It'll show you how to do that. And then for each of them, the key thing is you go and you figure out a way to put in preventative or detective controls that allow you to contain the problem before it hits your customer, and your customer being your executive S&OP team. So then we also maintain a consistent structure and a repeatable cadence. I love templates as much as possible. Don't try to create your presentation from scratch every single time. There's going to be some standard views and some standard ways that you're going to talk about the business, et cetera, that all you need to do is plug and play the new data and then go and put your insights in and have that conversation. And then a big one, no surprises. Send the pre-reads out 24 hours in advance. Make sure you're good. Don't keep sending revised ones. And then another thing that I do that's been well received from our general managers is I actually will send the pre-read out, and then I'll send what I call a general manager primer out to just the general managers. And I take them through the slides and I say, hey, on slide 8, to our North America GM, this is going to be a hot topic. I'm going to ask you to describe what's going on with this supply risk that we foresee, et cetera, and how we're going to mitigate it. And the key on that is I don't want the general managers to get in there and be surprised. I don't want there to be drama. And I want to have a good conversation where I turn to that GM and she says, okay, this is what the problem is. Here's who's involved, how we've assessed it, how we're mitigating it. And that makes it a very productive meeting versus dramatic and a lot of fireworks and not very productive. And then continuing on the blocking and tackling theme, during the meeting, again, a lot of this is common sense, I know. Each meeting starts with a closeout of actions from the last meeting. So you're making sure that people understand that, hey, we made all of these decisions, we talked about these action items, they got taken care of. We're not just saying it and letting it go as we move on from one meeting to the next. We try to keep simple and consistent. And actually some advice that I got from last year was don't try to dazzle them with your PowerPoint skills. You've got to be careful about that. Anytime you're putting something together, try to make sure that you want it to be visual to tell the message as much as possible, but also be careful about overdoing it to where you start to confuse them. And also some feedback that I received from our vice president was don't overpack the meetings. This is one of the mistakes that I made early on is I wanted to get everything in. And I would sometimes cut the conversation short because I knew we had all this stuff to get done on the agenda and we were lingering on this one topic too long and we were going to run out of time. And really the advice that he gave me is that the value in the S&OP is the debate and the discussion and the ultimate decisions that come from it, not the we're adhering to the process, we're hitting all the points, et cetera. So that was a good learning for me to dial back. And now what I use is if I have a lot, I prioritize and I'll put a time permitting section in there that in case we do run ahead that we can get to. But I'll put the critical stuff up front. And then after the meeting, always publish a recap within 24 hours of the meeting. And then you want to make sure to monitor and close all of those action items. Okay, and so what you're trying to do is build a reputation that, hey, you're reliable, you're going to take down the action items, you're going to make sure they get done, you're going to follow up, you're going to follow through. So then, now that we've gotten past really the obvious stuff, the stuff that you're like, all right, you got to do this, but if you don't, you're going to absolutely fail. Now we start to get into getting a more of a higher level. Let's talk about getting a business focus. And to me, the key here is you want one version of the truth, and this is going to be how you run the business in terms of the S&OP. So that's the key thing that you need to enroll your partners on in that journey. And the key thing is you've got to bring them in, and they've got to find value. It's got to be a business review, not a supply chain review, not packed with cross-functional jargon that other functions are going to glaze their eyes over on you. So what you want to do is you really want to understand and actively try to understand what your business partner's needs are, out of this meeting. And I'll give you an example here. I know it's an eye chart on here. You'll be able to see it probably better when it comes out and gets published. But my VP of Finance was constantly getting asked by our CFO a question around what levers we had last year in terms of, as the year went on, if sales went up or sales went down, where we could dial back our production, dial it up, et cetera, to make sure that we're hitting our working capital numbers. And so he wanted to be able to quickly answer that. And he didn't want units. He wanted units, but he also wanted EBIT and working capital. So what we did was I worked with him and his team, and we put together a template that showed the frozen section of kind of here, we're locked in these decisions, the slushy section, and then the liquid section, and then what each of the plants were, what the units were, what the EBIT impact would be, what the working capital was. And so then what we did was every single S&OP, that would go, sometimes it went in the content, other times it went in the appendix, but it was there every time because that was his walk-around page, that if the CFO ever asked him that question, he could pull it out and say, here's where we're at. And so that, for him, was highly valuable. And so there are examples like this where you want to understand your audience and understand what they are trying to get out of the meeting. And then think like a CEO. And so the key thing is don't think like a supply chain practitioner as much as what business problem are we trying to resolve here. And so what are the business measures that we care about? Revenue growth, EBIT, working capital, so on and so forth. An example that we have here is we really focus, and this is going back to the demand review, but we do a partnership with our market intelligence team, and market share is a huge measure that we want to monitor. And we know what our forecast is, and our market intelligence team has models that estimate what the market is, and we have this over several years. And so we have a process where we layer those together, and we talk about the forecast, and we talk about the implied share growth or share loss that forecast number that we have would mean versus the market intelligence estimate of the market. And that drives really good conversations because we may come in and say, okay, here's our number, here's kind of what we're talking about, and by the way, based on what we believe the market to be, that means we're going to grow 5% share in this particular geography. Does that make sense? And that sparks a lot of the right questions about, is that really in our strategic best interest? Is that what we're trying to go and do? So that's an example of how we try to do that, of bringing it to what matters for the business and bring it together in that fashion. And then connecting to the financials. Always try to connect to the financials. And so what we try to do is we do both the unitization and the monetization of the forecast that we're building. So we can talk in the language of business. And we also work on mimicking some of the views that our FP&A team uses. So a really simple example here, nothing fancy, it's again hard to see, but we've got a PSI progressions, production, sales, inventory, where we show how each of our snapshots of our forecasts have evolved over time. So you go from last year to the operating plan to our first official finance forecast to our second official finance forecast to the current one. And then you've got some bullets along the side here that explain the summary of the key drivers. Not everything that's happening, but the key big drivers. And that's kind of how we start the executive S&OP meeting is to say, let me set you the context of the big picture before we go into the details. And I know this has been mentioned a lot already in several of the sessions. In fact, I feel like I'm repeating myself with what I heard in several that I'm sitting on. But you got to keep the right perspective. And this is really tough. Again, I feel blessed in terms of the audience that I have, but I've been in other businesses where I see how this absolutely takes over. We're really focused on the 6 to 24-month horizon, but it can be so easy to get into what's happening this month, what are we doing, and get into the firefighting mode in the short term. And you've got to find a way to focus on not doing that. You've got to find a way you're not talking about the recent past or even the recent future. You're talking out along a respectable time horizon that allows you to be strategic and stay in advance of things that are going to materialize. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on. And this allows us, I believe, to provide more business insights and value that may not come from other perspectives. And a good example that we have here is this is a staple on the bottom of our S&OP process. For each product family, we have an inventory evolution chart that we show that has the last 2 years and then the next 2 years broken out by quarter. And then what we do is we show the progression of that inventory, and we also show the target levels that we need to get to, which is the target based on what we've calculated as the safety stocks, our pre-build, our cycle stocks, et cetera, all of those different attributes at the SKU level aggregated up. And so we have a framework that I think probably a lot of you have heard about that's a key KPI for us called Balanced Inventory Quality Ratio. It's one that we use to go and make sure that we not just have the right enough of it, or not too much, that we have enough, so that we're not too high or not too low. But this is a staple, and again, going back to what I've talked about before, we keep it simple. They know this is coming for each of our product families. We talk to this, we show at a high level kind of how the inventory is going to perform. We show a cut along the right-hand side of geographically our days on hand and where you have outliers that we need to look at, and we just have commentary where we're saying, okay, this is what we see and what we need to address in terms of risks. Okay? So then, the next thing I want to talk about is being decision-oriented. So from a decision-oriented aspect, really, the only reason you're having this meeting, you want to inform them, but you need to make decisions. There's things that you need the executives to help you to make a decision on. And so, some tips from my experience on this is, one, make sure you set clear, you can't make decisions on everything. So make sure you set limits on what gets escalated to this level because you quickly run out of time. Clarify who makes those decisions, who's accountable, who, so on and so forth. And ensure that everybody's aligned and that's the focus of the meeting. That's why we're there, etc. I like to storyboard the meeting in advance, kind of thinking through what my end outcome is. And as we talked about before, I try to prioritize the most important topics first. It can get easy to say, yeah, I can knock off these two real easy, etc. And so you start put the easy ones first, you run out of time for the important ones. So you've got to get the most important things first and focus on those. And then this is a point that I think is absolutely critical. Grease the skids. And what I mean by this is similar to what I talked about in terms of the general manager primer. Don't be coming into an S&OP with a really high-profile, stressful, major decision and drop it cold on everybody. What you want to do is you want to spend the amount of time sitting down with all of the key players, explaining what's going on, talking about the options, socializing in advance what the possibilities are, so that when you come into that meeting, everybody, at least the key players, are pretty aware of it, have thought about it, and you can have a quick dialogue and make some progress. Again, this forum is not for creating a lot of drama and fireworks. If you're doing your job really well as an S&OP facilitator, you've already greased the skids, and it's a pretty easy conversation. Be fully transparent on the good news and the bad news. And then, again, relentlessly drive for alignment and decisions. So this is, I think, my favorite one, and one that we're starting to make a lot more progress on. That's a lot of fun. This is getting towards the top of the pyramid. And this one is about embracing uncertainty. And as the saying goes, the only certainty is change. The only constant is change. So some tips from my experience. One is be really careful when the herd's all running one way and you're all running the same way. It's good practice to stop every now and then, pop your head up, and think, okay, what's around the corner? What are the possible alternative situations or scenarios that I should be considering here? Everybody, demand is growing, it's exploding, et cetera. Let's just fire up the machines. We've got to go after this. What could the alternative situation be, and what are the likelihoods of that? What would your levers be in that case? And a good one that I like to use, and I'm sure a lot of you guys do, but is using past performance and comparing and contrasting that with future performance. A great example is if you've got a plant that's running at 92% efficiency all year, and that your forecast for the rest of the year has it at 97. And so you're like, well, okay, what magically is happening now that we go to July that hasn't happened up to this point? Those are points where it's really important in an effective S&OP to be a detective, to go in there and try to find those things and bring those up to the right people to challenge those points before it becomes a bigger issue down the road. So you really want to create gaps and in terms of the risk and escalate that and create the visibility so you can make decisions. Okay, and so then probably the favorite thing or the most fun thing that I've hadn't been able to do in this job that we're just starting to get into now is around getting a lot richer in scenarios and analysis work. And so what we've done is we've recently put in place a network optimization model and are doing some linear programming. And in each cycle, we challenge our rough cut capacity plan with our linear program. But then also, we're taking it a step further and doing what we call, iterative simulations. And so we're using kind of a concept of a Monte Carlo concept where you basically say, okay, I've got my demand, my most likely demand is, say, it's going to be 5, but it could be 3, it could be 8, and I've got a most likely, a low, and an upside, and I've got a probability that I apply. So I don't want to get too technical with you, but what we've started to do is really get more advanced in terms of the scenarios that we're bringing to the S&OP. So, we're looking at one right now where we've got, there's 7 scenarios that we're doing. There's different configurations of a capital expenditure option. And so we could invest and really ratchet up our throughput on a particular line, but if we do that, we lose flexibility for this other product. And so now what we're doing is we're running simulations to say, okay, with our demand ranging for this type of variability, how does this hold up? It holds up well when we say, here's what we think next year's forecast is going to be, but how about if I introduce uncertainty and I move that around? Does it still hold up well if my demand's up or if my demand's way down? Okay, so those are some of the things that we're admittedly just starting to learn and kind of develop that muscle, but I see a ton of ability for us to generate value by driving that in the S&OP process. Okay, so the last building block that I have, this is kind of our self-actualization point right here. We're at the top of the pyramid. And the key here is don't stop. Don't stop improving, because there's always opportunities for you to get a little bit better. There's always opportunity to Kaizen your process and say, okay, I can take out some time from this cycle, and then I can take that time and I can spend it better over here. Or I can automate this process, or I can create this additional value add that can help our executives to make a better decision. So really always look for ways to refresh and improve your process. Be candid in assessing your strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of maturity models. I'm not here to kind of shill for any particular company or what have you. We use the Gartner supply chain maturity model. I think any one of the industry standard maturity models is good to be able to understand where you're at as a company, and then kind of basically dial in on where you need to focus in terms of improvement efforts. And that's what we've done to say, okay, we're strong in these areas, but we need to improve in these. So let's invest resources and run projects and so on and so forth. Benchmark, again, as I talked about, the key thing is, regardless if you're ahead of a company on the maturity curve or behind them, you're going to learn from another company. There's great things that all of us do, et cetera. And then the other thing is regularly survey your stakeholders. And so that's one of the things I told you about, some of the feedback that I got. That's one of the things I did late last year is I sat down with them and said, okay, what's working well? And please be candid, tell me what's not working well, et cetera. And then finally, it's keep it fresh. And this might sound like a contradiction from what we said before, where we're saying you got to simplify and standardize, et cetera, but you don't want it to get stale either. It's a balancing act of making sure that you're continuing freshening it up, making it relevant to the audience, getting better. Okay? So with that being said, I think I'm pretty close on my time here. This is kind of a quick summary, key takeaway of the building blocks. Again, you start with executive engagement, and I believe this is absolutely required for a success. Don't pass go without this one. Then you need to block and tackle, and if you don't do that, you're going to lose that executive engagement real fast. And then you get into make it about a business, not a supply chain meeting. Make it decision-driven. Understand that we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Our forecast is always going to be wrong, so embrace uncertainty. And then finally, be humble and understand that there's still opportunities to improve and embrace that journey. All right, you guys have been great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.